Welcome to the Arithmetic Zone, and welcome back to making our final website. In the last part, we continued making the timeline page by making the daily functionality of the timeline. So if I were to put in a random zip code and switch this to daily, then it would show me my timeline. Obviously, it doesn't look too well right now, but that is something we'll address later on with CSS. Anyway, today we're going to focus on the hourly portion right here if I select hourly. If you don't remember how we implemented this, I saved an API call where I gather the last 4 days and the next 4 days for the daily timeline info, so that if you were to select daily next 5, it would show the current day and the next 4 days, or if you were to do last 5, it would show the current day and the last 4 days. And for the hourly call, what I did was I took the data for today, tomorrow, and yesterday, because if you were to check the next 5 hours or the last 5 hours, there's no telling if the last 5 hours actually refers to yesterday or if the next 5 hours refers to today. And of course, I am using these sample calls that I made all the way back in February 26th. It is currently March 5th, so obviously this doesn't apply right now, but that is something we're going to fix later on. So anyway, let's get started with making the hourly portion of the timeline. So the reason why I didn't start with this one was because there's no way right now for us to tell what the current hour is on your device. Obviously, you know what the current hour is. At least for me, it's 10:58 p.m., almost 11 p.m. But how is JavaScript going to know that? Well, we're going to have to use some separate functions, and we're going to have to use a separate API, but luckily it's built into JavaScript, so we don't really have to do anything too complicated. It's called date. To construct a new date object, let's first make a new variable. Let's call it letToday, and then we specify with equals and then new date with parentheses. And let's try to print out this new variable that we just made, console.log today. And let me just remove any other instances of console.log, like right here, so it doesn't get confused. So let's load our website. Now note how I placed this these 2 lines of code outside of any method, and because it's not in any particular method, that means that this will always run whenever the web page runs. So you might have to refresh the page, but let's go back and see. And we can see that it printed out the information of today, at least for me, March 5th, 2023, Sunday. It also gives us the time. And the nice thing about these particular objects of this date API is that there's more methods to them. So let's make a new object. We're going to call it letTomorrow. And we're going to write new date. And we're going to write in a parameter this time just to showcase it off. What I can do is let new date today. And when I do it like this, essentially it makes a new date based on whatever the date of this is. So this is going to be the same thing, obviously, because when you make a new date with a blank parameter, it's going to be today anyway. But what I can do is I can use a method for the date API called setDate and another method called getDate. When you use setDate, you change the date object's date into another date, and when you use getDate, that returns that object's date. So obviously I use the word date a lot, but let's see it in action. So when I use tomorrow.setDate, what I can use is tomorrow.getDate, and this has no parameter because this just returns the date of tomorrow, and then I can do +1. Let's see it in action. So oh, I didn't print it out, so save that, and we can see it actually prints out the date of tomorrow, March 6, 2023, on Monday, with the exact same time. So using this principle, we can also make yesterday. So let yesterday equals new date today, and then we want to do yesterday.getDate, but instead of +1, -1, and also change this to yesterday and this to yesterday. And when we do that, we see that it successfully prints out the date of yesterday, March 4th, 2023, on Saturday. What's really nice about the date object is when you print it out, you notice that it always prints it out in this consistent format. And it's always the same length of the string, and the same length for the month, the day of the week, the date, the year, the time, everything. And that's why this is so useful, because we can turn this into a string and then use the substring method to split certain certain substrings of this message in order to specify the current date, current year, current month, and that's what we're going to use in our website. For now, we're just going to stick to these three and try to use them into our daily timeline. But the first thing we got to do is we got to turn these into strings. So how do we do that? Let's just write today equals string in capitalized like that, and then write in the object. And the reason why we have to parse them into strings like this is because we're going to use the substring method, and that only works for strings. These are date objects, so we got to convert them. It's not really going to do anything but make it more flexible for our code. So let's write in these commands, and there you go. Looking into how the date objects print themselves out, we need a way to refer to the current hour within these date objects. So we could use a substring method to count the index interval of the hour. So we want to specifically get this number right here. This represents the current hour for me, 11 p.m. So we have to do some counting here. So starting from 0, we're going to count up to this 23. And we also do include the spaces. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So this is 16, and this is 17, and this is 18. So it's from 16 inclusive to 18 exclusive. So now that we know that, let's go back to our code. If you remember how we formatted the JSON, I retrieved the data for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So we should ideally start from today. So that would be index number 1 out of 0, 1, and 2. So let's make a variable called let current day equal 1, which we're going to use as the index for the days. And then for the hours, is also going to have an index, and we're going to call it let current hour. And this is where we're going to use our date object. So we're going to write in today.substr. That's the substring method, and then 16 was the beginning index, and then it was a length of 2 because it was 23. So that's 2 letters, so write in comma 2. But this actually is not enough, because remember, substring is a method used on strings, and so we're essentially making current hour a substring of today, which is making current hour a string variable. But we want to use current hour as an index in our objects. So what this means is we're going to have to convert this into a number, to an integer that we can use to refer to the different properties. So just like how we casted these date objects into strings, we're going to cast these into numbers, and we're going to use the method called parseInt in order to do that, all in parentheses. And there you go. So now that we got that, we want to take our data, which we got to see what it was called again, because low-key I forgot, and I now see it's called timeline data. So with that in mind, we have to iterate through we have to iterate 5 times because we want to get the current hour and then the next 4. So let's first make our for loop, and we're actually not gonna use we're not gonna refer to the length of anything in particular. We're just gonna use a standard for loop with i's going from 0 to 5, just because it would be simpler for our case. And then if you actually looked into the JSON of all this data, so let's go into daily info, you'll probably realize that we don't actually use any of these properties other than starting from days, which is an array. So if there was a way to simplify this JSON to just start from days, luckily we have a way to do that. Underneath right here, we can write in let, and then write in squiggly brackets, and we're going to call it days equals timeline, not from there, equals timeline data. So now what we did is we essentially made a new JSON object derived from timeline data, but instead it only takes in data starting from the days property from timeline data. So to show you how that would look, let me just write console.log days, and this works if it's on hourly next 5. So let's see, it's not gonna do anything other than print, but as you can see, it starts with the date subproperty, so we have date time immediately. So this should simplify our code just a bit. But anyway, now that we know what our current hour is and current day, let's write in our div statements using the concept of DOM. And it's pretty much going to be the same thing from here. So I'm just going to copy this and put it in here. But we are going to have to make some minor adjustments because we are working with a new object that's not exactly timeline data. So new div is going to be the same thing. Now instead of new date, we're going to use new hour, because the date no longer really matters too much. So we're going to call it new hour. And if you looked into our JSON, the way we're going to refer to this is we're going to start from days, because timeline data no longer needs to be set because we use this statement right here. So we're going to use days. Instead of using I, we're going to use current day, because we're starting from today, right? We're starting from today, which is the index of 1. So days, current day, and then dot hours, and then current hour, and then we're going to do dot date time. So this is going to be the format we're going to follow for pretty much all of them. So days, current day, dot hours, dot current hour. So instead of date time here, this is weather, so that was referred to using conditions. Here, the temperature was referred to using the property of temp. Here, it was referred to using humidity. And I believe that is it. All I do is just append it, so just got to change this to new hour. And then that appends to new div. But obviously, you know, even though we have this nice little for loop, we're using these separate variables. We're using these separate counting variables, current day and current hour. And as of right now, they never change. So we got to change them ourselves. Well, obviously, when we want to put all the hours on this timeline, we want the hours to either increase or decrease. Since this is next 5, we're going to have the current hour increase after every iteration. But what about current day? Obviously, current day has to change if current hour exceeds 23. If it's 24, then that's the next day. Luckily, we could just write that in a for loop. If current hour happens to be greater than 23, so if it's equal to 24 essentially, then we want to reset current hour back to 0, because our API refers to the hours in 24-hour format from 0 to 23, and then we want to set current day equal to 2, and that should account for the issues. So obviously we're gonna have to debug this, but let's see what happens when we put in our zip code, write an hourly next 5, and it looks like it works. We got 11 p.m.'s weather, then 12 a.m.'s weather for the next day, not today, for the next day, and then 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So looks like everything works as intended, which is good news for us, because now we can just take all this code and then just modify it just ever so slightly for use in the last 5 portion, which is right here. So last 5, obviously we're going backwards, so we're going to start from today and check the last 4 hours. So everything up to here is basically the same thing. You may think we also have to change this for loop header to start from 5 and go to 0, but we actually don't have to do that. And the reason why is because we never actually refer to I in any part of this. We just use the for loop and I so we can iterate this 5 times. We're not actually using the index 5 here. So we can just leave this the same. The only thing we'd actually need to change is this bottom part right here. Obviously, we're going to check the last 4 days and today, so we don't have to increase current hour. Instead, we have to decrease it. And now we need to check, instead if current hour is greater than 23, we need to check if it's less than 0, because 0 is the minimum value of the hours in 24-hour time. So if it's less than 0, we reset current hour to 23, and then current day becomes 0, because again, we started from 1, and when current day is 0, that means we're checking yesterday's time. So, oh dear. So anyway, let's test this out. Write in our zip code, and let's write in, or keep it in hourly, and put in last 5 hours. Press submit, and we have the weather for 11 p.m., 10 p.m., 9 p.m., 8 p.m., and 7 p.m. So starting from 11 p.m., we're going back 4 hours to give us 5 hours in total, and we have the weather data for all of them. So we know that this works, which is great and all, but obviously we're using these samples right here, so I don't, max out the call for our APIs. We're getting all this data, which is really nice, but when you go to check daily, you're reminded of the fact, oh yeah, I got all the data on February 26th, and I haven't updated this so that it works for any time you check on this. So before we write in our calls to the APIs and saving them as JSON files that we can access, we're going to have to do a little more work with our little date functions right here. So obviously we got all this to work if we were checking the hourly weather, but what about the daily weather? We're trying to get the today in the last 4 days and today in the next 5 days. We're going to have to make some new functions. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make another one. Let me just copy this. We're going to call it let day lower limit. And essentially this is going to be today's date minus 4. Then likewise, we're going to have a day upper limit. So day upper limit. And then this is going to be the date 4 days from now, going into the future, while this is the date 4 days from now. So we made these new date objects, and obviously we're going to have to turn these into strings so that we can use them effectively in our code. So let's do that. Please excuse my horrid typing right now. Anyway, we got that to work. And what we're also going to have to do is we're also going to have to make a function that converts the month from the 3-letter abbreviations to their numerical equivalent. So if I were to press inspect, and if you were to check these date objects again, you can see that the month is given in words, specifically right here. They're all March, obviously, but if I were to check any other month, it would say, like February would say Feb, January would say Jan, June would say Jun without the E. It would just give you this 3-letter abbreviation. So we're going to have to write a whole new function for our purposes to convert that 3-letter abbreviation into numbers. Specifically, we need the 0 if it's a month before October. We are going to need to include the 0, so the API call works as expected. So I'm going to write const month convert. I'm going to use the arrow key, the arrow function method. So month is going to be the parameter, and then write in that. And then if month is equal to Jan, then return, and we're going to write a string so we can include the 0, return 01. If month is equal to Feb, return a string 02. I think you get the point, so I'm going to skip ahead when I complete this, and I'll be right back. So anyway, I went ahead and completed my month convert function. As you can see, I did add else if just for good practice, because so I don't have to write in, else if month is equal to December at the end. This if else loop can continue it's chained all the way to the end. And also, it seems I was mistaken. June and July specifically do not use 3-letter abbreviations. They are just 4 letters, so just keep that in mind, and just make sure to check your function with mine to make sure there's no typos. But anyway, once you have that done, let's start using these time functions effectively into our API calls. So I'm going to actually go back to my API. When we look back into the documentation of this specific API, we can see that to call the API, we first put in the slash after this URL, write in our latitude and longitude coordinates separated with a comma, and then we can write in another slash and specify the inclusive date range in this specific ISO format, and then write in question mark key equals and then your API key. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL, at least up until right here, before the latitude and longitude. And right here, instead of using the hourly info sample that I copied earlier, we're going to make a new variable. Let timeline API equals, and then we're going to put in our link, and we're going to use template literals because it'll be easier this way. So write in that link, and then now you would put in your latitude and longitude coordinates separated with commas. So write in our template literal with a $sign and brackets. And remember, our latitude, we already got our latitude right there. So lat, and then comma, and then another template literal, this time lon. After that, we could write in our API key, or we could write in another slash and then our inclusive date range. So for hourly, we want the date information from yesterday up to tomorrow. But obviously, we're going to have to use a lot of substring commands if we want to get the exact year, the exact month, and the exact day. So let's first write in our slash, and then we're going to need another template literal, and then we're going to have to do a lot of work here. So the order is year, month, day separated with dashes. So in our date objects right here, we're going to have to check the index of the year, which is right here. So starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the index is 11 and it's a length of 4. So we want to start from yesterday. So we're going to write in yesterday dot sub str, because it's already a string by this point, at 11, 4. So this is going to give us the year. Then we want to put in a dash. Now we want to specify the month, and this is where things get a little harder, because remember, the month is given to us in this format, not numerical. So right here, we're going to have to write month convert, and inside here, we're going to have to specify yesterday's month. So yesterday dot sub str, and then once again, we're going to have to find the index of this month. So it comes earlier this time. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like it's a index of 4. So, and it's a length of 3. So we're going to write in 4 for the index and a length of 3. Just like that. And that should get the month. Also, I am going to also say this in editing, but I was wrong after all about the date formats. June and July are still 3 letters, so keep them as June and then Jill like that. That was a big oversight I made, so make sure you don't make that same mistake. Anyway, after getting the month, we need to get the date. So after this blue template literal, we're going to write another dash and then write in another template literal. And we have to get yesterday's date. So yesterday.substr, and then once again we're going to have to check the date. So to get the date is right here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So index 8 with a length of 2. So after all of that, we only started the range of this date range. We need to get the date of tomorrow's date as well. So write in a slash, And then we're gonna have to just copy all this because it's the same indices, thankfully. And then we're just gonna replace every instance of yesterday with tomorrow. So we have yesterday, yesterday, and yesterday. Starting from here, we're gonna write in tomorrow. And we're gonna put it right here and right here. So now that we did that, if you don't remember, we have to write in the question mark now, and then the key equals your API key. So I'm gonna go retrieve that real quick. Alright, I got my API key. Got it from my account if you don't remember where to check. And now that we finally got this long timeline API string, we can finally convert it into JSON. So let timeline response equals await fetch timeline API, and then let timeline data equals await timeline response dot JSON parentheses. So now this is the new timeline data, which should always work. And there we go. We basically got the hourly portion of the timeline completely working. Now we have to write in all this same code for the daily portion right here. So I'm just gonna write in the slash, and then I'm gonna write in all that code. And then obviously for daily, the range is different. We're starting from day lower limit to day upper limit. So we're gonna have to update all these, day upper limit. Update all the yesterdays, or actually no, day lower limit, I'm sorry. Day lower limit. Update all yesterdays to day lower limit. And then for tomorrow, we're gonna update it to day upper limit, so we get the next 4 days instead. And this should work the exact same. Anyway, I got all that to work. So everything fits in nicely, but obviously we don't know if this is gonna work until we test out our code. So let me just X out this tab, go to our weather timeline, write in our zip code, and press submit. Alright, well, that weather is pretty accurate, I must say, but we're not really gonna know if this works unless I check the daily so I can get the actual date. And there we go, we got March 5th up to March 9th. If I check last 5, I get March 1st to March 5th. So hallelujah, we finally got a working timeline. This starts from 11 p.m. goes to 7 p.m. I might have it go backwards, but obviously we need to make this look not trash. So finally we get to work on the CSS portions of this. So I'm actually gonna make a new CSS page, simply because I do think that there's so much like exclusive content in this page that it does warrant its own. Anyway, I do think the timeline div could be centered, so give it the ID of timelines. Let's see if I can get it to display flex and then justify its content in the center. And you know what? I am actually going to temporarily return to using the dummy data. So it's set to hourly by default. Hourly next 5. So I can be sure that I won't call it. And it looks like I forgot to link my HTML to the new CSS page. I did it to the old one, but not this one. So timeline.css. If I save. Oh yeah, well now this is in the middle. And now all this is in the middle, but yeah, we're gonna have to. We gotta change that. That is not my intention at all. So flex direction should be in a column. Alright, so that seemingly does the job. So now I also want to put this zip code header in the middle as well. So Again, we're going to have to observe our HTML page for our reference. So zip is a div of the body. So what I could try doing is putting both of these divs into their own div. So right here. And what is this one? Yeah, move these two into this new div I created. And give this a new div. Align center. Very, very specific purpose that this div does. Hey, let's see if it didn't mess anything up. Alright, other than resetting the page. So align center. Have it everything basically the same as this, where everything's in the center and is in a column. And then specifically I also want to give I do want to give extra margins at the top because it's pretty tight there, just like that. And also some space between the actual enter your zip code and the hourly and range selections. So between the label, or rather between input ID zip input, hashtag zip input, we're gonna give it margins of 10 pixels. Alright, that seemingly does the work. So anyway, let's write in zip code. And I do got my little timeline. I actually do want the timeline horizontally. So that is specifically timeline divs. So hashtag timeline divs, flex direction row. And whenever you're using flex commands, don't forget to write in display flex, or else they're actually not going to work. So wrote in display flex, and now everything's in a row. But obviously everything needs more space. So specifically, I wonder if I actually gave any of these separate divs an ID. So, and I didn't, but luckily I can just refer to it using hashtag timeline divs and then div and then margin left 10 pixels and also margin right 10 pixels. Give them some space. It still needs more space in my opinion. So 20 pixels on both sides. Oh, whoops. Alright. Alright, that looks good. Now I think all these divs could use, their own border. So border 4px blue solid. And border radius 10%. Give it a little rounded edge, and I think they could also use some padding, about maybe 20 pixels each. And I think the timeline itself could use its own background color, maybe aqua. And the timeline could use its own padding with its own special border, so like that. Okay, this one definitely should not have border radius. And then of course there needs to be some space from the top. Alright, and in just a matter of seconds we made our timeline look way better. I mean, just look at that. That looks way better, doesn't it? Of course, if I try to view this on a mobile device, it doesn't work so well, but luckily that's a very easy solution. I could just have everything be in a column. So at media max width is equal to 1030 pixels. I forgot my colon. So inside of here, we're gonna make hashtag timeline divs go in a column. So when we press inspect, it all goes in a column now. Obviously, we're gonna need some extra space between each cell. So hashtag timeline divs div we're gonna say margin top 20 pixels, margin bottom 20 pixels. Alright, so now you have to scroll down. And then finally, I could definitely, move the zip form to the center. But we gotta review what HTML IDs they have. So the real issue was that submit button. But I could just refer to form, have it display in the center, and align items in the center. That might not be enough, but let's see. Alright, it wasn't, so... Oh, because I did display center. And then I think flex direction should definitely be in a column here as well. Alright, that doesn't look half bad. I think hourly next 5 specifically though should be in a row. So let's see how we can accommodate for that. It's because this form doesn't have its own ID. So time range, we want it in a row. So let's call it row time. And then hashtag row time, display flex, flex direction, row. Alright. And it looks like looks like this just stopped working. Probably because I maxed out the calls, unfortunately. But anyway, let me just add more space in between that. So margin top. And then between each option or between each select, there needs to be some space. Looks like that didn't work. Oh, it's because I put hashtag. There we go. And honestly, looks like it works. And it looks like the timeline still works, but this is just hourly next 5. Let's do last 5. Alright, so now I can finally get rid of all this, get rid of this dummy data, turn it back into the actual data, and we finally got a working timeline. So if you want it to always, initialize the timeline upon visiting the website, what you can do is somewhere in your code, like literally anywhere, like let's say right here, you can call one of these functions. So I recommend getLatLon because that's the one that starts it all. You don't even need a parameter because using the arrow functions, this is the default parameter 1 2 3 4 5. So it gives us the zip code. It initializes the zip code of 1 2 3 4 5 and gives us the weather like as such. We could change it if we want. Hourly last 5 gives us that. What about last 5 days? Gives us that. What about next 5? Like 1 2 3 4 5 gives us that. So everything works. Our timeline page is finally completed. Home page is completed. About page is completed. And news page is completed. We essentially combined our entire knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make this website. So thank you guys for sticking this long with me. This finally marks the end of the Introduction to Web Design series. This was a huge part of the channel, and I do intend to start new computer science series. Probably not next week, but we'll see what additional content I can cover. Personally, I'm leaning toward teaching Java and teaching Python, not specifically other facets of website development. But I do think that this course is definitely really useful if you just want to get a basic understanding of how you make websites, what you can put on them, and how you can make them efficient. Anyways, thank you guys for sticking with me all this time, and I hope to see you guys next week. So, oh dear. Let's go here and let's write in our zip code, and this time we're gonna check last 5, and let's press submit. And it starts from 11 p.m. goes to 10 p.m., 9 p.m., 10, wait,